Again, thank you very much for the invitation extended by, of course, the Philippine Association of Researchers for Tourism and Hospitality, Inc. And of course, APCOR, the Asia Pacific Consortium of Researchers and Educators. And of course, from our good friend at University of Technology, Myra of Malaysia. Of course, I would like to commend the first speaker. Thank you very much, Dr. Ishmael Mensa, for sharing the virtual screen with me. And of course, the hundreds of participants that we have from the 16 countries this afternoon today. Okay, so I think majority of the topics were clearly discussed, but I'm going to focus on how to avoid common mistakes in the initial phase of postgraduate research writing. I think this is a very good opportunity for us to share. And this advocacy is, of course, something that would be very relevant to those postgraduate students, those who are currently doing their thesis or dissertation. Let me proceed. Okay, so I'm going to discuss specifically first the challenges in writing theses and dissertations, generating research topic ideas, the different sources of research topics, choosing a research topic, and common mistakes and some pointers. Okay, so are you afraid of making mistakes? I think when we commit mistake, this is a very good opportunity for us to learn. It means that we've been trying, and as Adam Osborne said, the most valuable thing you can make is a mistake, because you can't learn anything from being perfect, and nobody's perfect. Even if we try to work laboriously on our papers, there would always be mistakes. There would be opportunities for us to correct, opportunities for us to improve our papers better. So a good research is seen in the way its topic is framed. Again, a topic is the main organizing principle guiding the preparation of a research report. Topics would offer us an occasion for writing and a focus that governs what we want to say. It also represents the core subject matter of scholarly communication. So we cannot expect that choosing a topic for a research project would be an easy task. It's a very daunting task for a lot of people, although we can take different sources. For a lot of people, it's a very critical decision to make. And so, how do we choose our topic? Normally, there are three scenarios. First, in some of the universities, they would provide you with a general topic area from which you study a particular aspect. In some, you will be provided with a list of possible topics to choose from, or on most institutions, they would leave it up to you to choose a topic, and only you can, start to write and investigate about it. So I think there are different scenarios that is present in most institutions. But like what Dr. Ishmael mentioned, you have to understand what university requires from your research project. You have to understand your core requirements. Normally, this is the battleground. If you're not aware of the expectations and requirements early on, majority of the researchers would stop in the middle. And so it's very important for us to determine what is allowed, what is not allowed in terms of, for example, originality requirements. Are there topic restrictions? Are there data requirements? Are you allowed only, for example, to use secondary data, or should it be both a combination of primary and secondary? Are there methodology requirements? Are you going to be focusing on qualitative or quantitative methods, or a combination of both? And of course, as emphasized, the different ethical considerations that your university is requiring. Again, when you start writing your paper, you have to go back in terms of familiarizing yourself with the basic research process. I think for most of us, we're very much familiar with the whole process, but it would be very helpful if you would have a very good review of the research problem, how do you come up with the literature review, the different methodologies available, and of course, how do you write and present your data, and how you conclude and make recommendations towards the end. So familiarize yourself with this sphere for you to be more comfortable as you embark on your study. Now, how do we generate research ideas? I think this is something that you have to keep in mind, that, you know, you have to be very flexible and focus and take one step at a time. So research ideas needs to be interesting and workable. And one common mistake is choosing a topic where you have a very strong emotional attachment. It's good if you have a good working knowledge about, you know, it's the topic that you would like to write about, but if you have a very strong emotional attachment about a certain topic, then that could lead to biases. And at the same time, this strong emotional attachment would, you know, give you different interpretations, especially when you're collecting your data. So we have to be very particular on our choice of our research topic. So where do we get our research ideas? As mentioned, you get it from experiences. So every day we get experience in our academic, in our professional and personal lives, different experiences. You can gather research ideas by being in the field. Of course, reading a lot of existing literature. This is very important. Of course, social issues would be a source of research ideas, especially those social issues wherein there is really a need to solve a particular problem. You can also go for the current and future trends, consultations like with the industry, with the government, with business, and of course, brainstorming with your peers and with your colleagues. So these are basically some sources of research ideas. Another way for you to be able to gather ideas about your research is through what we call the scamper. So the scamper is a useful list of words to help us think differently about a problem, idea, concept, or issue. This was developed by Alex Osborne, and later on it was further developed by another theories for him to be able to create a mnemonic. Scamper simply means S, substitute, C, combine, A is for adopt, M is for modify, T is putting things into good uses or other uses rather, E is to eliminate, R is to rearrange. Now let's take a closer look. So how do we use scamper techniques? So first, when you use substitute, of course, you try to remove some parts of the accepted situation, things or concept, and replace it with something else. Like for example, what if the teachers are paid based on performance and not the number of hours? When you combine, you try to join or force together two or more elements of your subject matter and consider ways that such combination might move towards a solution. For example, combining watch with a smartphone to come up with a smartwatch. Another way is by adapting or adjusting. For example, changing some part of your problem so that it works where it did not before. Video consultations, we never used to do that, where experts cannot be face-to-face. Modification would simply means considering many of the attributes of the things that you're working on and changing them if necessary. Like an example is, well, what if we change the premium? What if we change the benefit package? Putting to other use would mean modifying the intention of the subject, thinking about why it exists, what it's used for, and what it's supposed to do. Challenging all these assumptions and suggesting new and unusual purposes. For example, can certain types of service be delegated to tour guides, or are they limited? Eliminating would mean removing any or all of the elements of your subject by simplifying or reducing it to core functionalities. For example, what if we eliminate entrance fees in recreation facilities? And the last one is by rearranging or changing the direction or orientation. For example, requiring late examinees to reschedule rather than be worked into a schedule at a particular day. So these are some of the things wherein you can draw some of the ideas. Remember, okay, I cannot see the go back. All right. I think it was clearly mentioned that you have to be able to identify your broad research areas that interest you, and by using the research funnel approach. So you have to be able to choose something that will keep you motivated. In the timeline that was presented by Dr. Ishmael, it would extend to, the whole study would extend from 3 to 4 years. But in some settings, it could be more than that. And so your research, the research area that you've chosen could be something that would keep you motivated enthusiastically, something that would, sustain your good spirit. And so you have to choose a topic where you could have a good faculty or industry support. More often than not, we feel isolated because of doing the research on our own. And so it's very important that we have a good support coming from the people who will be able to help us or give their full inputs and assistance to us. In your study, you have to ensure that you add to the existing body of knowledge. It's not about just finishing the degree and then producing the final paper output. It has to be something very substantial. It has to bridge the current gaps in knowledge, and it should be useful in policy formulation, should be able to solve a particular situation. In other words, it has to be something researchable that would keep the interest of the readers, something that would be relevant, something that would be put to good use. Okay, so how do you narrow down the broad research area? Of course, creating a more niche area. First, you have to read and understand past thesis and dissertation. You have to read, and read a lot. And so a lot of researchers would say, why do we have to come up with a lot of readings when we're just starting? Isn't it that we have to do it when we're doing our chapter 2 as we review literature and studies? Of course, before you even conceptualize your research problem or topic, you have to embark on a lot of readings already. You have to identify what kind of research topics that these dissertations or theses have covered. And from there, you have to be able to understand what the current research is and what are the gaps. One common mistake is choosing a topic that is too broad. Because when the topic is too broad, of course, you lack your focus. There's no specificity. And so another tip is you have to choose a general topic area. For example, in the area of, in the hotel sector, and give specific description of the topic area. If you would like to focus, for instance, with, say, turnover, and then mention an aspect of a specific topic. So what influences turnover of employees in the hotel area? So using, again, the funnel approach. Specifically, you can also use this technique. So how to narrow down a research idea. First, by using an aspect technique. So you have to choose one lens through which to view the research problem or look at it in another facet. You can also try to narrow down your research idea by looking at the components, by breaking the initial variables or units of analysis into smaller parts, which can be analyzed more precisely. And of course, you can also narrow it down by looking at a place, making the area of analysis smaller. So that way you narrow your focus. You can also narrow down a research idea by looking at the relationship, like causal relationship, cause and effects, for example, or you try to look at different perspectives on how variables could relate to one another. Time can also be narrowed down by shortening the time period. Of course, the shorter the time period, then the more narrow the focus would be. And of course, by the type. Focus on your topic in terms of specific type of class of people, places, or things. Another way is by utilizing the FRIN to finer. So of course, FRIN would stand for further research is needed. So when you look at when you read that the last part of the thesis or dissertation, normally the researcher would have a section there, further research. And so you try to read that and try to identify, because from there you'll be able to know the research gaps and convert it into something visible, interesting to the researcher, novel, ethical, and relevant. So again, when you try to determine how feasible it would be, you have to look at the scope, the time, the money, and the expertise. Is it something doable when you look at your own time frame? So a while ago, it was presented the timeline or the Gantt chart in terms of finishing the different aspects of the paper. Is that something doable? Money is also a factor in terms of feasibility. When you say money, do you have the financial capability? Because if the research undertaking would extend to say 5 years, 7 years, I think that could really a toll on us financially as a researcher, and of course, your expertise. Is it interesting? What makes it interesting? It's interesting if it's highly significant, especially for the readers. Novel, so you have to be able to confirm, refute, or extend previous findings. So it has to be something novel, new, unique, or there's a new discovery that came out of the paper. Of course, it's ethical if it passes through an institutional ethical review process and there's no breach in terms of ethical consideration. So I think most of the universities have different take on how the committee on ethics are being formed. Again, common mistakes. First would be choosing a topic that is not doable due to lack of data or information. This would be something that would block your enthusiasm if there's not enough data or information available. Because normally the panel would ask you for data or information. If it's not available, then it would take a toll on you emotionally. Another common mistake is choosing a topic that is too general and both challenging to work because there will be so much information available. So this is the opposite. You have a lot of information and so you don't exactly know if this information would be valuable or relevant in your paper. And so some people, they just try to put everything together in the paper, but it's not highly relevant or significant. Or choosing a topic that is too technical. Now, if you have the technical expertise, I think this would take off. But if you've chosen a topic wherein you lack the technical expertise, that could be problematic in the end. Choosing a topic that is too personal to the researcher, I think that has been covered in terms of emotional biases. Another common mistake is, of course, failure to provide the proper context to frame the research questions, which is very, very important. Failure to delimit the boundary conditions for your research. I mean, there's no scope that has been mentioned. It's open, and so again, you cannot keep your focus. And of course, failure to read landmark studies. So this is some of the common mistakes being done. Now, in terms of title formulation, so these are some of the helpful tips. You have to be able to outline your title by using keywords or information from literature. You have to draft your title multiple times. And again, normally the title is a provisional title, meaning it can change. And as you further your studies, you will have lots of discoveries. And as you pass through your supervisor and your panelists, there could be a lot of revisions. And so sometimes towards the end part of the journey, the title could still be changed. Formatting, not to exceed 15 words. So I'm not very sure if this is a standard for all, but you don't want a title that is too wordy. Surveying, of course, you have to be able to solicit feedback among experts. So this is very important. Title should also be reflective of the problem under investigation and the variables of the study. Now, of course, you have to pass through your proposal stage. And normally in the proposal stage, you have to defend the 3 chapters, chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. So this is something that you have to hurdle. And before you can even compose chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3, there are a lot of things that you have to consider. Okay, so first, in the background of the study and problem statement, okay, you can take this example. Imagine that a friend runs to you with a very long story that you find difficult to understand why he is telling you that and what he intends to do. At the end of the story, you're likely to surprisingly ask him, and so what? The answer he gives to your question, the so what, is referred to as the problem statement. The long talk would be your background. So when you try to look at your background of the study, it should be able to answer the question, so what? And at the same time, you have to be able to explain it in your background statement. Introduction. So the purpose of this section is for authors to briefly introduce the subject, including the purpose of the study. some helpful tips here. You have to be able to write a strong thesis statement by providing compelling reasons why you are conducting the study. You have to be able to justify at this point early on that it is a valuable study and it is worth embarking. Otherwise, again, the study will not be able to take off. It has to be brief and clear, inclusive of the literature review. Long paragraphs must be avoided and ambiguities must be eliminated. So at this early stage, you have to be able to remove already all of the compelling reasons for the panel to decline your paper. In other words, it has to be explained. You have to be able to create a stand that indeed the paper is relevant and that it is worth conducting the study. The background of the study, so before a problem statement is stated, a brief background is usually given depending on the topic and the writer's style. Now, this background can take from normally 5 to 10 pages, and if it's that long, it has to be trimmed down. So the background normally would give the reader the general definition of the topic or the problem area, the historical basis for the existence of the problem, the efforts made towards addressing similar challenges, and how the efforts fail to be realized. Hence, there is the need for your study. This is one thing that you have to be able to remember. It has to be emphasized already during the background that the effort that you're doing is going to be something valuable because a research gap has been identified. The common mistakes in writing your background study introduction. First, the background is too long or too short. Of course, you do not want to spend the whole time reading the background. You have to be able to synthesize it in a manner that would be understandable to your readers, in which case you have to focus on including only the important details, but you have to be able to write it concisely. Another common mistake is background that is ambiguous. Ambiguously stated background of the study, something that would confuse your readers. Another common mistake is a background that discusses unrelated themes. Sometimes we tend to put a lot of information, but when you try to read this information, it doesn't have any bearing with the research topic. So you have to, again, reread your study and discard all of these unrelated themes and only focus on information that is related to your study. Background is disorganizedly written. So you have to be able to organize your background of the study in a more cohesive format. Remember, you can understand your paper, but the reader should be able to understand it better. I think that is the leverage. If your reader will be able to understand your paper, I think that's going to be an indicator that you've written it well. Okay, so your research problem statement is the foundation and the focus of your research report. You have to remember that this is the centerpiece, the focal point of your proposal. Thus, it should be described, explained, and predicted very clearly. It is the most critical part of the research because it provides focus and direction for the remainder of the study. And so, normally, when you go for your proposal defense, the panel would spend a lot of time looking at your problem statement, making corrections, because generally speaking, if the problem statement is flawed, then the rest would not be aligned with your research topic. And so this is a very critical part of your thesis or your dissertation. It has to be clear. It's a standalone statement that can make explicit what it is you're aiming to discover or establish or research into. So what are the common mistakes in that formulation? So first, it's poorly worded. If it lacks clarity, then you have to be able to, again, reformulate the statements. So no cited literature as foundation of the research. At this point, literature is already very important. You have to be able to cite some statement as part of your foundation. If it's unfocused, if it's ambiguous, and again, the absence of research gap. So again, the good and feasible research problem statement must be clear, it must be researchable, and it has to be able to address a problem. Again, the rest of the research is likely to go off track very early. So you have to look at the bigger picture, not losing sight of the details, so that you'll be able to proceed with the study without any challenges. Again, part of the chapter 1 would be the hypothesis. The hypothesis normally divides the research problem into smaller parts. So they control the whole structure of the research, and they are validated, or if they are validated or invalidated. Now, what are the common mistakes when writing the hypothesis? First, some hypotheses are formulated in terms of interrogative sentences. It has to be formed as declarative sentences. Second, it doesn't express a relationship of at least 2 variables. So you don't see any connection between variables. And the last one, it doesn't have the ability to be tested. So you have to be able to test the hypothesis. Some good outcomes-based verbs that you can use in your objectives would include identify, define, describe, review, indicate, formulate, explain, compare, contrast, suggest. And here we have more like differentiate, derive, evaluate, establish. We have to be able to remember that to use verbs that describes outcomes and not process. Again, you have to be able to use verbs that describe outcomes and not process. So examining, investigating. So these are all parts of a process, but this is not an outcome. Tangibility is highly important in formulating your statements. The theoretical framework provides the assumptions for the larger context of a study. It is the foundation or lens by which a study is developed, and it helps to ground the research focus under study within theoretical pinnings. Now, what are the common mistakes in writing your theoretical framework or choosing your theoretical framework? First is not connecting the study to the already existing body of knowledge. You don't seem to connect, you don't seem to find the connection in the existing body of knowledge. Another is copying framework without theoretical relevance to the present study. And if the theoretical framework doesn't have a clear relationship to your study. So it has to be well connected to your study. It's very easy to get a lot of theories, put it in your paper, but it has to relate, it has to be aligned with your paper. The conceptual framework represents the researcher's synthesis of literature on how to explain a phenomenon. Now you have to make a clear distinction between the theoretical and the conceptual framework. The theoretical framework provides a general representation of relationships between things in a given phenomenon, while the conceptual framework, on the other hand, embodies the specific direction by which the research will have to be undertaken. Sometimes the conceptual framework is also called the research paradigm. So what are the common mistakes here in framing your concepts? So first, it's not based on literature review. And for some, they are using the IPO, or for some, it's still acceptable. But there are some institutions, they have decided to forgo the input process output and then use other innovative conceptual framework. But first, I don't see anything wrong with the use of IPO, but if you can use other framework, okay, so I think that would be something that you can do as part of innovation. Another common mistake is utilizing the same ideas, concepts, theories in the theoretical framework. And of course, you have other parts of chapter 1, like significance of the study, scope and limitations, definition of terms. In terms of significance of the study, we have to remember to mention or to specifically identify the beneficiaries or the relevant clusters of people who will benefit from our study. Scope and limitations, you have to identify the what, the who, the where, when, and how. So that would limit or frame the scope of your study. This would set the boundaries of your study. Definition of terms will identify the different terminologies that is going to be useful for your readers. So it has to be operationally defined. In chapter 2, some of the mistakes that we can identify would be outdated sources. So for some institutions, they would require you to have at least 5 years validity of all related literature and studies. But I think this has been disputed because there are really some literature that still stands and that is still useful, especially if you're looking into theories. Another common mistake is irrelevant or invalid data. Writing the chapter without fluidity, it doesn't connect from one paragraph to another, or citing the sources incorrectly and the use of internet sources to a noticeable extent. So again, when you're writing a paper, it is not recommended to use Wikipedia as a reference source. And also plagiarizing or copy pasting. So I think that's a very common mistake. Now we go to chapter 3. So these are the parts of the chapter 3. Now what are the common mistakes here? So first, wrong choice of methods. Okay, so when you choose the wrong choice of method, I think this is a major mistake on the part of the candidate. If there's no clear relationship between questions and proposed methods, there are times when the problem statement is not answerable by survey instrument or qualitative instruments, and so this would disalign also the result of the study. Another is there's no clear sense of proposed procedures. The reader will not be able to identify the process, how you were able to gather your data. Another mistake is that sampling size is not enough. If the population is too big and then your sample size is too small, then that is not representative of the whole population. And so again, you cannot make a very good conclusion if the sampling size is already flawed. Another common mistake is failure to discuss the inclusion or exclusion criteria of your participants or respondents. Cannot identify why you chose them. More or less, it bounded on the idea that they are the convenient people to ask or to respond to your questions. And so this is a common mistake for some of the researchers. And another one is the vague description of the method of analysis, statistical and qualitative method. So this has to be discussed in very, very clearly in your chapter 3. Now, some topics of interest. I think with this pandemic, we were able to look into innovating some of the topics that we have currently. And even the data gathering procedures is taking a different shape nowadays. And so some of the topics of interest that is now being done by a lot of researchers would focus on first, smart and innovative tourism development, tourism resiliency, crisis innovation, promoting sustainable tourism development, emerging skills and competencies across tourism and hospitality sectors. We used to talk a lot about the fourth industrial revolution, but of course with the advent of this pandemic, we've discovered that we may not be teaching our graduates or students the skills needed to be more competitive in terms of the present landscape. Creating synergies and partnership across tourism sectors, like how do we create collaborations or networks using a virtual platform, for example. Of course, the use of technology in terms of innovation, and a lot of tourism impact studies focusing on different locales. So a lot of topics are being focused on how this pandemic have affected different places and different industries across tourism and hospitality. Virtual and augmented reality, and of course, risk management in different sectors and in different approaches. So once again, I'm going to stop there because it would only focus on the initial phase of the postgraduate study. I'm sure there will be a lot of things to discuss when you go, when you try to do your chapter 4 and chapter 5. But having discussed all of this, I think it's very important for us as we continue our journey in our PhD or master's to have a very good sense of time and discipline when you write your paper. And of course, again, not giving up. Patience and a lot of positive attitude would propel you to finish your degrees. And different journeys for different people, but I hope all of you or all of us will get to the finish line successfully. Again, thank you very much, and we say mabuhay to all our listeners for tonight.